Back to the basics. It's the whole point of Bitcoin. The whole point of Bitcoin is that you can own the money. You can possess the keys and the property in such a way that it is not possible with any other asset that I can think of. We own houses, we own land, but guess what happens if you don't pay the real estate taxes? Like, it's eventually going to catch up with you. You can hold gold in a safe in your home, but if you don't pay your real estate taxes, like, they're going to come take your gold. Or if somebody breaks in your house, Bitcoin is the only asset you can have such extreme ownership to the point that memorizing 12 words in your head can be your wallet. That can be how you hold your Bitcoin.
This is the Blue Collar Bitcoin Podcast, a show where average Joe firefighters explore the most important monetary technology of the 21st century. We talk Bitcoin, we talk finance, and we talk shit.
In this chat, we speak to Seed, the gentleman, nay we say shadowy supercoder, who heads up the SeedSigner project. If you are not aware, the SeedSigner is a stateless Bitcoin signing device that can be built from inexpensive parts. This is a really cool project. If you have any nerd in you at all, you want to build one of these yourself right away. With Seed, we talk about his background as a police computer forensics expert. We talk about the reasoning for keeping your own keys versus letting a custodian hold them. We dive into a bit of self-custody basics, and we talk a bit more about advanced setups, i.e. Multi-Sig. Self-custody is extremely important in Bitcoin. Make sure you completely understand and practice with everything before moving your whole stash into a new wallet. You can follow Seed at SeedSigner on Twitter, and you can follow us at blue_collarbtc, or send us an email at bluecollarbitcoinpodcast@gmail.com. As cool as the SeedSigner is, a cold card it is not. The new Cold Card Mark IV adds layers and layers of security for your keys that is simply not found on other signing devices. It features not one, but two secure elements, each made by a different vendor. Redundancy, security, and safety are paramount when you are storing generational wealth. Our choice for absolute best security is the Cold Card. CoinKite makes and sells everything you need for cold storage: metal seed plates, punches, industrial SD cards, and the cold power to keep that cold card a pure virgin, never having touched a computer ever. Use our code BCB to receive 5% off a new Cold Card Mark IV. Blue Collar Bitcoin is sponsored by Ledin. Ledin is a very unique financial services company with a highly principled Bitcoin forward perspective. They are the first ever digital asset lending platform to undergo a formal proof of reserves attestation, where an independent public accountant regularly attests that the company is properly accounting for client assets. Simply put, this company mirrors and embraces the transparency, accountability, and auditability of the Bitcoin protocol and network itself. If you've listened to this show much at all, you've certainly noticed that we advise our listeners to be careful, manage risk, and not get over-leveraged. And that does include ensuring that any borrowing and lending decisions you make sound mathematical sense based on your lifestyle and specific situation. Where available in your jurisdiction, Ledin offers a menu of powerful financial services. Keep ownership of your Bitcoin and access dollar loans with Ledin Bitcoin-backed loans. Harness your Bitcoin holdings to buy a new property or finance the home you already own with the upcoming Ledin Bitcoin mortgage product. Save Bitcoin and USDC to have access to Ledin dollar loans or trading service if available. You can look into Ledin's well-architected menu of services at ledin.io. Visit start.ledin.io/bluecollarbitcoin to sign up, and you'll get $10 in USDC for creating and funding an account.
All views and language expressed by the hosts and guests in this podcast are solely their personal opinions and do not reflect their employers or organizations they are associated with. Do not treat any of the content in this podcast as investment advice or as an inducement to follow a particular strategy. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only.
Josh, we got a spook on the show.
Mr. Seed. You know what? The thing is, cops may be good for a few things. Like when we go on psych calls, Dan, they're good for absorbing punches. They're good for hog tying crazy people. And apparently they're good for creating signing devices. Like, who knew? You know?
Yeah.
Don't they call us like the blue Canaries? Isn't that what you guys call
Oh,
it?
that's true. Yeah. Like that's for like hazmat calls when there's like a bunch of chlorine fog in the air and you see cops hitting the ground. Like, yeah, that's exactly what you guys are, Canaries.
Go check out that smoke-filled building. Report back on what you see in there.
If that
I
smoke's
think
not
we saw a
black or
guy in
white.
there with a gun too.
Yeah.
Seed, seriously, thanks for giving us some time tonight. We're pumped to chat.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation too.
I gotta say right off the bat, nobody sees the video, but I do have a different background than Josh is used to seeing. I am on vacation. I'm like hesitant to say this because this is like taking it to a whole nother level of podcast Bitcoin loser. I am on vacation in an Airbnb in somebody else's master bedroom, and my family is hanging out in the living room. I'm almost asking for like an intervention here. You know, what I mean? This is kind of pathetic, but
it's how far can we push Murphy's Law?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Dan has escaped his parents' basement and is now on vacation in an Airbnb.
Exactly. Seed, tell us about yourself. Give our audience an intro to you and your background and how the hell you went from being a cop to making do-it-yourself signing devices.
Yeah, it's I guess a long story, but high level. I was a cop for 15 years. Was for the first 3 years like a writing tickets, responding to fights in progress, the usual cop kind of stuff. And about 3 years into my career, I was asked by my chief, "Hey, there's this digital forensic unit that is kind of spinning up and looking for people. Is that something that would interest you?" Because he knew I have a little bit of a background in technology and computers. And so it sounded amazing, and I jumped at the opportunity. So for the first like probably 2 or 3 years, you go from kind of being much more of a user level of knowledge about computers to, for like a couple of years, you just drink through the fire hose like every day at work, learning about everything from it's basically like a CS degree that you're trying to pick up on your own. Everything from binary math to some programming to how storage works to how data is physically laid out on volumes, operating system artifacts, mobile phones. Just like if whatever happens to come across your desk, and that's the digital forensic exam you're working on, you have to learn enough to be able to speak and write intelligently enough,
right,
to analyze evidence and write a police report. And I was super lucky to have received a lot of great training through, private partners and as well as like U.S. federal government organizations. And I heard of Bitcoin first at work, and I kind of refer to my Bitcoin journey as like two acts. Act one is kind of Bitcoin the investment, and Act two is like Bitcoin the freedom technology slash a counter of government and government spending, and so yeah, the first kind of chapter of my Bitcoin life was much more about how much is this investment going to appreciate, and then I'm slightly ashamed to say it, but we sold everything in 2017, and don't be envious because it was the wrong part of 2017.
If you don't mind us asking why, I can certainly understand reasons, having studied Bitcoin history and the fork and everything. Was that part of it? What kind of scared you off and said, I'm cashing out? I'm assuming some healthy returns, but what other than that?
Yeah. I super blessed and super fortunate in that regard, even for being early in 2017, because I first started Bitcoin in early 2013. And what spooked me was a few things. First, I think just in the background, my storage setup was horrible. I was using something called bitaddress.org to store coins, and I just printed out kind of public-private key pairs. And I'd done it, being a guy in forensics, I'd done it securely in the right way. Like I used a live CD and took the computer totally offline and printed these literally with a printer that I destroyed.
This is something that's
afterwards.
So unappreciated by people in the space at this point is that in 2017, and Dan and I were both involved back then. Sorry to cut you off.
Not at all.
This shit was not anywhere near as locked down as it is
Not
now.
even
Like,
close. Yeah.
like I remember very clearly like splitting Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash back in the day. And it was the scariest thing I've ever done because it was a significant amount of Bitcoin. And I had no idea if the route I was using was legitimate. And it was just up in the air. Like, who knows if this is going to work? If it doesn't, I'm losing a lot of money. But yeah, to your point, like, this was nowhere near as institutionalized or as sound as it is today. Not
or
even
is user
close.
friendly. Yeah. I mean, I still have
user-friendly.
Bitcoin. I have some orphaned Bitcoin Cash out there somewhere. Kind of like I have orphaned Bitcoin Cash the way Josh has illegitimate children all over this country. And additionally, like paper wallets were a big thing. Like I remember at the firehouse, we were all there was like 6 of us getting into it and we all had paper wallets. Nobody's doing that anymore.
Dude,
but
we know a guy, Dan and I know a guy who vacuumed
painful.
up a paper wallet that was worth like $1,300 in 2017. So actually it's probably worth $1,300 now. But it's gone.
That time of year, but yeah.
Yeah, but that Bitcoin is gone because he vacuumed it up. It's gone.
Yep.
So that
People
spooked
don't
you though,
realize
huh, Steve?
that-
Like you were saying that.
I think that was one of a few things going on. So number 2, just as timing would have it, as Bitcoin had gone through like this big bear market through 2014, 2015, and then into 2016, I didn't know what to expect from this investment, but I always told myself in the back of my mind that if this appreciates to the level that my wife and I can pay off our house, and we don't really carry a lot of debt beyond that, but if we could pay off our mortgage and have kind of like a fresh start, absolutely debt-free life,
Yeah.
it seemed like a pipe dream, like in 2013 and 2014. But then as we got into, because I kind of kept buying, through the bear market, and as we got into 2017, in like the first few months, like it was flirting with this being a reality that we'd be able to, it was a binary thing. I'd sell everything, and we were able to totally legit, as much as I hated doing it, legally pay the taxes and everything, and then had enough money left over that we were able to pay off our mortgage. And it was getting into probably like March or April of 2013. 2017. It was starting to flirt with that amount. And so I was on edge because, I mean, you guys maybe in a similar boat. Like I'm came up in a blue collar household. Like people like me are not accustomed to those kind of financial returns. And you start to freak out thinking like, well, a bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. And like, what if, because this is also the third thing I'll talk about is like Bitcoin Cash, like you alluded. And this was when the fork wars were starting to heat up. And I'm thinking like, if I lose the ability to pay off my house because some geeks are arguing about parameters and software, like that I probably am more likely to never forgive myself for that than if I sell this investment too early.
Yep. Totally understand that.
Yeah. So, and the paper wallets, like you talked about for a while, like paper wallets were almost the gold standard of Bitcoin security. Like before hardware wallets became popularized, or before, like you might think hardware wallets, as soon as they came out, they were like, oh, now we have hardware wallets. But those hardware wallets took a while to establish themselves as a trustworthy, like reliable way to store Bitcoin over time. So, in the beginning, it was Bitcoin Core, which is, what do you can encrypt your backup. But you still feel like unsafe about that. So a lot of people use paper wallets. And then there were some kind of specialized projects. I can't think of the name. Trace Mayer had financed kind of an early air gap setup where you could run an offline machine that was just used to
Glacier
interact with
protocol,
keys.
right?
It wasn't Glacier. It was something before that. I'll be kicking myself after this because it came up in conversation the other day. But yeah, whatever. So I part of 2017 was just I don't think I was comfortable with my storage setup, and that is part of what fuels me with SeedSigner. Is I think that if people are more comfortable with their setup, they're less likely to have these horrible paper hands and sell everything.
I couldn't agree more. We talk about that a lot on this show, Seed, and that's if you're going to cold store, you at least need to vaguely understand what's actually happening. I mean, even if it's as simple as, a desktop wallet and a node, and even if it's just kind of the basic self-sovereignty steps at home, having some degree of understanding of what the key is, where the key is, when it's exposed, stuff like this. I'm not here to knock Trezor and Ledger. Like, there's a place and a time for that, and it's a fit for a lot of people. But having their, nice user experience and just plugging the device in with USB doesn't, for a lot of people, totally teach them what's really going on. And I think that's an important step towards being comfortable, as you just said.
I call, like, what you mentioned about that user experience of plugging it in and interacting with, some software that may not be, it may not make it clear kind of what's going on under the hood. I call that like the bebop boop experience. Like, you plug something in, I entered a PIN code that is associated with that, but I'm not really sure what happened, but it says I can send my transaction now. So, like, everything must be good. But you also mentioned plugging a device in via USB. And for me, with my forensics background, like, that just plugging in a Trezor or my first hardware wallet, I think it was a KeepKey, but whatever it was, plugging a hardware wallet in via USB made me nervous because if you can update the firmware with that device, like, if you end up with the wrong software version, or end up with some malicious code, or there's some sort of malware on your system, like, in theory and practice, bad things could potentially happen. So,
Yeah.
as to kind of skip forward, like, so I was super blessed. Paying off our house kind of paved the way for me to start to think about a path out of law enforcement, because I was so for the great majority of the 12 years I was doing digital forensics, I worked in crimes against children, and that was very gratifying work, but also very difficult work. And towards the end of it, they don't offer a lot. I don't know how it is with firefighters. You guys probably have, like, comfort dogs and all sorts of
We
stuff.
get it all. We get it all. Seed. You guys get nothing. We get it all. I hate to tell you. Yeah.
But we didn't have,
with the amount of work Josh does at our agency, he should literally just throw on a ski mask, walk into Village Hall with a gun, and rob the registers. I mean, it's pathetic. No, it is, though. In all seriousness, it can wear on you. I mean, our job's the same way. Where we see a lot of fucked up medical shit and a lot of just elderly people or anyone comorbid people suffering. I'm not saying it's the same as crimes against children, but you do it for 15, 20 years and you have a different lens on the world than the people at the dinner parties you're with, for the most part.
For totally. And you guys see a lot of people in a lot of difficult life situations, whether they're elderly people who may not have anybody in their lives to care for them.
Exactly.
Or, like, homeless people who are grappling with, significant health issues or significant mental health issues. There's a lot of ugliness out there in the world. And I just felt like there was not a lot of support for me personally at the agency I was working for. In terms of, it was something that I'd recognize as an ongoing theme with, I was very fortunate. I mentioned before, I go to training and got to the point in my career where I was starting to assist, like, lead trainings in different parts of the country. And I was getting to interact with a lot of other law enforcement officers. And after training during the day, what do? We go out and drink, we go out and talk. And most of them were dealing with this kind of, like, 2008 through 2015, like, explosion in crimes against children, because it was kind of during the same time that Napster and then LimeWire and then not Tor, but I'm forgetting myself, the other peer-to-peer network that was kind of like the one after LimeWire that actually people still use today. Gosh, my brain's failing me already. As there was an explosion in these peer-to-peer file sharing protocols, like, there was a huge proliferation of illicit material on the internet, to where you had to be a real weirdo, and go into a porn store in the 1970s or 1980s,
right,
or after that, to where, like, maybe in the 90s or the 2000s, you might find a local bulletin board or something shady like that. But, like, what I'm getting at is, like, I ran into a lot of other police officers who did these type of investigations and who spent hours every day sorting through the most horrendous images and videos you can imagine, who were just like hurting inside. And you could just tell it affects your relationships. It affects how you interact with your kids and kind of like the lives that they've had. I don't want to belabor this too much. So I was looking for a way out. And I was super blessed that Bitcoin kind of paved that way out for me. And my wife works. She does pretty well in the corporate / professional world. So I was blessed to have the opportunity to be a stay-at-home dad for my kids for the last 3 or 4 years.
Very cool.
And it's been a tremendous journey, and what a blessing. And I'm in the summertime right now, so I have a little bit of enhanced responsibilities in terms of the kids being home all day, and we got to find things to do and get them to camps and do all that kind of stuff.
We're both very familiar with that.
That's bullshit. You know, Josh and I are at different phases. I have 2 real little ones. Josh's kids are starting to go to school, and when he gets off that 24-hour shift and goes home and does absolutely nothing, has no responsibilities, I'm envious. I'm looking for them to get school age.
It's in the middle of no responsibilities and still having to deal with bullshit. So, like, I don't think Dan is quite characterizing that in the right way. But yeah, it's quasi no responsibility.
Point is, though, they get off of school, and that's awesome. But it's also like, oh, there goes 7 hours a day when Daddy was free.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, are yours sleeping through the night yet, or are they getting older than that?
I have a 2.5-year-old and a 10-week-old. So the 10-week-old is not sleeping through the night.
So when Dan characterizes it that way, I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. So they sleep through the night. So he's right about that. But they still get up at like 6 a.m. and they're ready to fuck shit up.
Yeah. Seed, I got 2 questions based on some things you said. The first one is, I'm interested what your contact with Bitcoin was in 2013. And then secondly, your reintroduction to Bitcoin after selling it, and where the SeedSigner idea comes from.
Right. So the first question was, there was another examiner in the forensic lab I was working at he had been assigned a case where there was a local kid who had gotten fairly nice gaming rig for Christmas or his birthday or something like that. He lived in a nicer part of town. So he's probably a rich kid, got a nice computer, and he is apparently mining Bitcoin with his dual GPU gaming computer. And this is 2012, 2013. So it's still viable to mine a reasonable amount of Bitcoin with a couple GPUs, just barely. We started to see FPGAs and then ASICs, but anyhow, so he's mining a little bit of Bitcoin at home. He's buying weed on the Silk Road. He's having it shipped to his doorstep.
What an entrepreneur.
Genius.
Right, exactly. Sign this kid up. And he's breaking into smaller bags and then, of course, taking it to school and making a tidy little hustle out of, mining Bitcoin and turning it into cash
power,
at school.
Beautiful thing. Yeah.
So that kind of took me down the rabbit hole of like, what the heck is this thing? Like, why would people be contributing all this compute power to it? Like, what does that accomplish? And it was just like a lot. Like, I remember being on Bitcoin Talk, and they had all these weird limits on there. Like, you either had to you had to browse for a certain amount of minutes or something before you could actually post. And I remember like the first thing they suggest you read is, of course, the white paper. And Satoshi was an actual member of Bitcoin Talk. And I always remember seeing his profile, and he had like the highest number of stars and the hero tag and everything like that. And so it was like Bitcoin Talk, and then I probably got more involved in Reddit. Was a big thing at the time, before Twitter kind of took over the Bitcoin social landscape. But so anyhow, I spent like the next few years like learning about Bitcoin and also shitcoining, and I had GPUs running in my basement. I think I had about, at the peak, like a total of 10 GPUs running, like literally all sorts of shit. This was kind of like the first generation of shitcoins, like
first gen shitcoins.
So like, you on Bitcoin Talk, somebody would post like, oh, next Wednesday I'm going to launch this coin, and it's going to be a quote fair launch. And so
wait, can I ask you, what were the main shitcoins you remember from that era, just so that we can tell people, like, all right, so there were like 3 shitcoins eras as far as I'm concerned. There was like the 2013 to 15 era. there was the 15 to 17 era, and there's like the 17 to 22 era. So in your mind, what existed then that seemed realistic that is totally dead and forgotten about right now?
Litecoin may as well be totally dead, but it was like obviously it wasn't the first altcoin, but one of the earliest.
Yeah.
There was another one called Feathercoin, which was kind of like Litecoin on steroids in terms of the block time and the issuance schedule and all that kind of stuff. There's one called Redcoin that for some reason I remember that one. I think Potcoin originally launched back then, but you didn't really hear about it until Dennis Rodman got involved several years later.
Dennis Rodman got involved.
History repeats.
It's awesome.
Dennis Rodman. I mean, the Litecoin narrative, to go off on this tangent, I was compelled by the Litecoin narrative when I first got in. Like, it's Bitcoin, but better. I mean, it was literally just like, it was early. This was 17, so it wasn't
Bitcoin.
super
It's
early.
the silver to Bitcoin's gold.
Yeah, that was.
Except that makes sense,
that's what
except
drew
for
me
it
in.
wasn't real. Like in reality, that might seem realistic, but like in the world of digital everything, like that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right. As you learn more, and as I learned about the history of silver, about basically silver only became to be a monetary metal because Bitcoin just wasn't divisible enough to handle like smaller transactions. So I guess people were in the market for a different metal that, had some similar properties or whatever. And that's kind of how silver came to be
Well, you meant gold,
monetary
right?
metle.
Yeah, I like how that was a Bitcoin
It was
Freudian
a Freudian
slip.
slip.
You said
Did I?
Bitcoin instead of gold.
that's
Silver was the silver to Bitcoin.
yeah, that was a flip.
Wait, so was it after interacting with this specific case with this kid that did you do enough research right then and there to start accumulating yourself?
So like everybody does, you somehow think you're smarter than the system. And so I remember pitching my wife in the living room, saying like, there's this company who makes this thing called a Bitcoin miner. And they haven't actually like finished the design yet. But if we give them money now, like when they finish the design and prove it can work, they're going to send us one of these machines and we'll be able to plug it in like somewhere in the house. And we'll be able to basically like create units of this digital currency that I'm like, down the rabbit hole learning so much about. And much to my wife's credit, like, she went for it and was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, yeah, you should spend like $1,500 or whatever it was on this like magic internet money printing machine that blah, blah, blah. And it was, it was called Butterfly Lab. And they were actually an American company that had successfully developed an FPGA. And they did in fact release a successful miner. They were always embroiled in controversy because it was always believed that they were mining with the equipment for a couple of weeks before they'd ship it out, and so they could take advantage of, because this was just when ASICs were starting to come on the scene, so the mining difficulty was like exploding, and so they would like mine with the machines until the difficulty like went up that significant amount, and then they would mail them out to like other people to, I guess, capture the rest of the return with the devices.
What a nice little scam they had going.
For sure.
Yeah. So another kind of like fun aside is as I was doing all of these shitcoins, we actually mined in the forensic lab at work. But it was, so we were
now we're
very
talking.
Wait. Wait. Let me understand this for sure. Let me make sure I completely understand this. So you mined in the forensics lab with their electricity, or like they understood that they were mining Bitcoin and they were okay with it?
It was all sanctioned by my boss. I have to
experiment for the case, right? Trying to better understand.
It's not like Dan and I have ever thought about that, like plugging in an ASIC at the firehouse. We've never thought about that at all.
Never thought about that at all. No, so my boss was very cool about, because technology and computers and mobile phones and everything, it's a continually evolving field. Like there's new stuff coming out every month, every year that we're going to have to be familiar with and comfortable with, because eventually we're going to see this in case. And as digital currency was kind of becoming more popular and Bitcoin's growing, like part of, it was kind of like, I think Google at some point would give their employees like 20% of their work week just to say like, find something you're interested in and curious about and just like work on that or contribute to it or something. And just count that as part of your employment. And my boss didn't explicitly have that, but if you found something that really interested you, like for me, for a while, it was password cracking. For another guy in the lab, it was mobile device forensics and mobile phones. And another guy's specialty was kind of like hard drive recovery for failing hard drives. If you found something that interested you, my boss was very cool about supporting that. And like, if there's any business case that could be made that it would be of use at some point in the future, like he would do what he could to help you. So I'm deep down this digital currency rabbit hole. And at the time, obviously, we didn't have an ASIC in the forensic lab or anything like that, but we did have a very cool training room with 25 decent-ish computers in it. And at the time, it was kind of the trend in shitcoins because GPU mining had gotten so crowded that there were a limited number of shitcoins that you had to mine them with a CPU. They were like CPU only coin. And they would they would either use algorithms that nobody had figured out how to run yet on a GPU, or they would rotate the algorithm so it would change every some number of blocks or whatever. So anyhow, for some number of months, I set up all of the computers in this training room when we weren't using the training room to mine, these shitcoins. And then back then, there was an exchange called BTCE, and it's out of Eastern Europe. But you get an account on this exchange with no kind of KYC, you just sign up with an email address, and it's like, all right, send us your cryptocurrency, and you can trade it for other cryptocurrency. So I spent a fair amount of time mining Primecoin, which was one of these early CPU only coins. And every day I would transfer out the Primecoin that we'd mined and send it to this BTC exchange, and then I would trade it for Bitcoin. And then the forensic lab was kind of like keeping Bitcoin on a balance sheet. And when we got into the first, I think at the peak, because I probably traded into a few Bitcoin by that point. And at the peak of 2013, there was a service, I can't remember what it was, but you could send this company Bitcoin, and they would buy something for you, like a computer, whatever you want. They would buy it for you and ship it to you, and they'd handle all of the exchange of converting your Bitcoin to dollars. And so I bought a new iMac with Bitcoin, and had it shipped to the forensic lab, because it was it's the forensic lab's money. We're going to use this for work purposes, so it just made sense to me. And we always have trouble getting equipment, because you're a government organization. You guys, I'm sure, know how that goes. And so I ordered an iMac and had it shipped to the lab, and it shows up in the big iMac case, blah, 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 straight from Apple. And my boss is like, what in the hell? How did you buy this with your personal money? How did this happen? And he knew that we'd been mining and stuff, and that the price had gone up, but he didn't totally get it, but it kind of clicked for him then.
And you're like, now you could have bought a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, yeah. Well, yeah. But so we had Bitcoin on the balance sheet for a while. In the run up in 2017, we didn't spend quite as much, but we did buy everybody nice monitors, nice dual widescreen monitors, which helps a lot with real estate for different forensic tools and stuff.
And a little bit of marijuana for each guy.
For sure. and just a dab of cocaine. So
just for experimentation purposes in the lab.
For sure. And mushrooms. Yeah. So Seed, so we're here talking about mining Bitcoin back in the day, but everyone is listening to us saying how does this matter? What does this matter to me? So where I think this does matter is where your expertise comes in, which is tell us about where and why you should be using your own custodial devices for storing your Bitcoin. What's the reason for not storing your Bitcoin on BlockFi or Celsius or Coinbase or any of the other custodians? Give us some good reasons why we should not be holding our money in places where we don't hold the keys. And why is holding our keys so fucking important?
Back to the basics. Love it.
Back to the basics. It's the whole point of Bitcoin. The whole point of Bitcoin is that you can own the money. You can possess the keys and the property in such a way that it is not possible with any other asset that I can think of. Like
Nor can I.
we own houses, we own land, but guess what happens if you don't pay the real estate tax? Like
Gone.
it's eventually going to catch up with you. Like you can hold gold in a safe in your home, but like if if you don't pay your real estate taxes, like they're going to come take your gold, or if somebody breaks in your house, like well, Bitcoin is like the only asset you can have such extreme ownership to the point that memorizing 12 words in your head can be your wallet. That can be how you hold your Bitcoin. So that's for me, that's like one major thing is that is the whole point of this asset is that we don't have to like have third party custodians hold it and then issue IOUs for it, kind of like,
Amen.
everything else has become. But at a practical level, like we've seen over the last couple of weeks, like there is unfortunately like a lot of leverage and a lot of rehypothecation that's built up in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
A
And
lot of clowns. A
yeah,
lot of
and
clowns.
people holding their own coins help it honestly really helps prevent a lot of these shenanigans that these firms are able to pull by the one thing I'm thinking of is like it was with BlockFi. Like if you're a retail if you have a retail account with BlockFi and you want to borrow money or anything like that, like you have to over collateralize your loan just in case there's a margin call or anything like that. And even then, like you are subject to a margin call if your capital on hand exceeds the value of your loan, if there's a drop in price or something like that. But these huge trading firms, are able to essentially like escape that over collateralization, and it's just like the fiat finance system where not to the extreme degree that a lot of banks are running a fractional reserve, but a lot of these services are able to functionally run a fractional reserve because they're lending out more than the assets that they have under their control. And that so to get back to your original question, self custody, like it helps you avoid all of these reindeer games, and it helps you take responsibility for what is truly yours. You don't have to worry about rug pulls. You don't have to worry about somebody's server getting compromised, or it's this extreme form of self reliance and ownership, and you can be your own man. Is that sexist to say? But yeah.
You know, this point is so freaking simple yet so freaking important. Bitcoin is the world's first digital bearer asset. But if you're not
Exactly.
taking custody of your Bitcoin, guess what you're not reaping the benefits of? A bearer asset, right? If you are not custodying your Bitcoin, right, you're exposed to promises dependent on promises, systemic risk that's at sort of an unparalleled level in today's financial system. As you said, leverage, reckless rehypothecation. Like you can exit all of this shit by cold storing your Bitcoin. Now you need to be careful. We're constantly saying on this show, don't get out over your skis. Make sure you have an inheritance plan. You know what you're doing. But yeah, I'm just echoing exactly what you said. You're not taking advantage of the real discovery here unless you actually possess this. And you don't actually possess it unless you hold your own keys. It's that simple.
And one more thing I'd point out is that self custody is foundational to more private Bitcoin use. So for people who are interested in what do they call them, collaborative spends now, or they used to be known as mixing coins, or I don't know what the correct terminology is right now, but to use Bitcoin in a more private way, the very first step is taking custody of your coins, and then you can build on top of it from there.
So what is the point of SeedSigner? Let's get to this now. So what makes it different? What hole are you filling in the self-custody landscape? Because it's unique and empowering, but I think it's worth explaining to people what you're doing and why it's different than them buying a ledger, a Trezor, or whatever.
Right. There's a couple of different advantages to SeedSigner. One is it's something that you build from commodity hardware. So for anyone who's not aware, the core ingredients to a SeedSigner are ideally a very specific version of the Raspberry Pi. A lot of people are familiar with Raspberry Pis. They're used in building a node at home.
Right.
But there's a smaller version of the Raspberry Pi called a Raspberry Pi Zero. And then if we dial into that one step further, there's a very specific version of the Raspberry Pi Zero called a version 1.3. And the special thing about that particular version of Zero is that it does not have Wi-Fi and it doesn't have Bluetooth. So the absence of wireless communications makes it this kind of natural, very air-gapped yet inexpensive little computer that you can run a full Linux operating system on, but without having to worry about it having the vulnerability of being connected to via Wi-Fi or via Bluetooth. So to jump back where I was from that, the components of this Raspberry Pi Zero, then we have you can think of it like a little video game controller with a screen on it. So it's a display and control hat that is installed on top of the Raspberry Pi. And then the third ingredient is a camera that you attach to the bottom of the Raspberry Pi. So you have a screen and controls, a little tiny air-gapped computer, and then a camera. So the only way this thing can talk to the outside world is through information that's displayed on the screen and then what it's able to read in through the camera. So being able to buy this commodity hardware without someone else knowing that you're planning to use it for a Bitcoin purpose largely nullifies what some people would refer to as a supply chain attack. So when you buy a hardware wallet, and it's inherent to all hardware wallets, because that device is explicitly used to either secure Bitcoin or to secure Bitcoin and or other cryptocurrencies, the use case for that device is known from the time it's manufactured all the way through to when it's packed up and then potentially in the mail. If, depending on how the manufacturer actually orders, the underlying components, the microcontroller and other stuff, for the hardware wallet, like it's potentially known what that device is going to be before it's even made. So being able to build what I call a signing device instead of a hardware wallet out of commodity hardware takes this supply chain attack out of the question. And another kind of like spin on that, which wasn't apparent to me when I first kind of fell into the idea, because there are parts, largely like most things that are, quote, invented, like all this stuff had been created in different ways by other people before me. It also, when we came on to the Human Rights Foundation's radar, we received a grant from them last fall.
Didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, we super lucky, super fortunate to receive a grant from the Human Rights Foundation. I was invited to speak on a panel at their Oslo Freedom Forum, which was held in Miami in 2021. And what they partly recognized as an advantage of the device was kind of related to this defeating the supply chain attack, was if you are a Bitcoiner or someone who's attempting to use Bitcoin as an activist in an adversarial environment, or maybe in a part of the world where Bitcoin use is discouraged or maybe even outright banned, you're kind of limited in terms of your Bitcoin storage tools. You're limited to paper wallets or a mobile phone wallet, hot wallet in that regard, because it can be tough, one, to get hardware wallets in some parts of the world because they're either just not available or because the only place to buy them is through the black market. And you don't really want to buy like a security critical device from
definitely not.
Some sort of black market source. So what SeedSigner enables is for people, I've had a couple people, for example, in Iran reach out to me who just really were excited about the device because they're able to order these not Bitcoin specific parts and assemble it and use it privately in their home without anybody else needing to know that they're saving with Bitcoin or interacting with the Bitcoin protocol in any way. So that's kind of another advantage of the SeedSigner model.
So badass. It makes me think. I think one key theme, Seed, in this space is it's not that everybody will, but it's the fact that you can that matters, right? And that's why this is an empowerment tool. Like if you think into the future, which we need to do if we're believers in Bitcoin, expect draconian measures. We've already seen them in the world. We're probably going to, in certain parts, see more of them. How are people going to properly store this stuff under regimes or leadership that don't understand this or outright, trying to eradicate it? And it's initiatives, open source initiatives like yours that are laying the foundation for empowerment for people to access this asset. It's amazing, dude. It's fucking awesome.
So you could sit there and think that like, oh, I have a Trezor or a Ledger or a cold card or whatever. But this is an this is another device, an ancillary device that you can use for your multi-sig setup. So like you have a cold card, a Trezor, and now you could potentially put together a SeedSigner for a very small outlay of cash. And this is just doubling down on making the amount of your exposure to the outside world less each and every time. So like you're exposed with Ledger because they obviously got hacked. Everybody knows who you are. You're exposed with Trezor potentially. With Cold Card, they don't keep anyone's information, so you're probably not exposed there, but you have a Cold Card. And then you have a SeedSigner. Layers and layers and layers of not being known and having a multi-sig setup, which is extremely important.
It's another tool on the spectrum of sovereignty options, right?
Exactly.
As you cut to this.
And that's another good point. That's feedback I've gotten from a lot of people who are very privacy conscious in terms of their Bitcoin uses, like being able to assemble this, order the parts and assemble this on your own, helps not land you on yet another list of Bitcoiners because of different services that you potentially vendors you buy from, or services that you may use to acquire Bitcoin, or whatever other company in the Bitcoin space. So the commodity hardware, that's kind of one aspect of it. The second aspect of it that came somewhat through, I recognize the value of it by virtue of my digital forensics background, and it's something that to kind of get back into my story, in 2017, sold Bitcoin, was a little bit embarrassed about it afterwards. And then like the price just kept going up and up. So there was like a long, probably about a year where I just didn't even want to hear or think about Bitcoin, because every time I heard about it, the price was like a few $1,000s higher. And I'm just thinking of like, oh, I could have like not just paid off my house, but bought a vacation house somewhere.
Yeah.
Like if I would have just been a little bit more patient. So for a while, like I didn't want to think about Bitcoin. And then in 2018, the price started to come back down and we're going back into a bear market. And I find myself kind of listening to the same Bitcoin podcasts and starting to kind of follow the same accounts on Twitter and read more about Bitcoin. Except this time, like I'm paying more attention to the U.S. Federal deficit and what I feel like is, an unsustainable financial path for our government. And you start, I have kids that are getting a little bit older, and you start thinking about like, what is this place that I'm going to be leaving behind for them? And I started to think about Bitcoin as a more of a check on the power of the government to potentially separate money from state and make the government more responsible, more accountable with the resources that they're able to get from citizens. And so as I started kind of averaging back into Bitcoin, I'm looking for a better way to store my stuff that's not just a paper wallet in my underwear drawer, basically. And so I hear a podcast that Stefan Livera did with a guy called Michael Flaxman, who's a kind of a security researcher, cryptographer. And he wrote this thing called I believe it's called the Bitcoin 10x Security Guide. And it's an open source document on GitHub. It's all out there in the open, but he was talking about some of his best practices for securing Bitcoin. And he also he was talking about a program that I had heard called Spectre Desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And
We've both used
I actually
Spectre.
hadn't heard of it. I hadn't heard of it before. Multi-sig was something that, like, ever since I had originally heard of the concept and it became possible in the protocol, I knew it was something that I wanted to use to secure Bitcoin. But the tools for a long time just weren't there. There was like institutional custody with BitGo, but like in terms of the average Bitcoiners, like hands-on tools, they just weren't out there. Spectre Desktop was one of the first. So I started looking at Spectre, and Spectre also had kind of a companion project to their desktop mobile wallet, or not mobile wallet, desktop wallet coordinator software. It had something called the Spectre DIY, which was it's built as a hardware wallet, but you can't technically store the keys on it. But I would call it a signing device, because by default, unless you elect to store your keys on there, it operates with this computer science principle called stateless. And what statelessness is, just a fancy CS term for either everything or certain things are not remembered by a computing device once it's been turned off or once power's.
Right.
And so you could use this Spectre DIY you can input your private key into it. And then through this really elegant kind of process with Spectre Desktop, with the private key never leaving the device, you could prove that you cryptographically own the private key and were entitled to spend the coins. And you communicated that proof via QR codes. You would read in Bitcoin parlance, it's referred to as a partially signed Bitcoin transaction, but you can just think of it as a draft transaction, and it's relayed from your laptop into this Spectre DIY signing device with QR codes. Several QR codes are displayed. You scan them in with a little scanner, and then up on the device it shows you like the proposed spend, and you approve or deny, and then a new set of QR codes is displayed on the screen that again contains cryptographic proof that you have the right private key or keys to be able to spend the funds. And you show that to your computer's laptop, and it reads that transaction with the signatures into it. And then voila, you can now broadcast the transaction with the signatures in the blockchain, able to do the spend. But with my digital forensics background, this was a extremely elegant process.
Yeah, this made sense with your security framework that you had in your head at work, right?
That totally worked around this kind of uncomfortableness that I had with plugging in a USB device and having it communicate proof of, private keys that way. You can also do it with a micro SD card like Cold Card does. But for me, this QR exchange process was like a beautifully elegant way to maintain an air gap and to use an extremely kind of restricted protocol for those two devices to communicate.
If I can pry a little bit, because I have no computer science background whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can inference from what you just said, basically anytime you plug something into a hot connected computer, which would be a computer connected to the internet, it's vulnerable, correct?
There's a lot of what ifs in that statement. I would not argue at any means to say it's potentially vulnerable.
That's a beneficial heuristic to think that way, I'm assuming. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is like in your mind, what is the best way to communicate with the Bitcoin network? Can you outline for our audience the best heuristics for communicating with the Bitcoin network possible? Like what's the best practices for dealing with your private keys?
When I was probably a teenager, McDonald's had this sandwich called the McLean. It came in this really awkward, messed up styrofoam container where they would put the lettuce, tomato, and one of the halves of the bun on one side, and they'd put the cheeseburger, the actual burger, and the other bun on the other side. And their tagline with it was like, keep the hot side hot and the cold side cold, cool side cooler, whatever it was. Anyhow, with when dealing with Bitcoin transactions, like that's kind of what, for me, this what Spectre DIY does and what we do is keeps the hot side hot and the cold side cold. And what I mean by that is you have two separate computing devices, one of which we'll just say is your laptop, and your laptop is running a program like Spectre Desktop or maybe Sparrow or some other coordinator. And when I say coordinator, all that means is that it coordinates with the Bitcoin network, and it also, if you're using Multi-Sig, it coordinates assembling the key information such that you can create a Multi-Sig wallet. So the hot side is the side that's intended, the side that is designed to talk to the internet and the Bitcoin protocol. The cold side is this separate device that is intended just to interact with your private keys. Mm. So the idea behind this device is that it should never be physically connected to a computer that talks to the internet. It should never have any sort of like wireless protocol or wireless communication capability, be that Bluetooth, be it Wi-Fi. I'm not even a fan of NFC. So this separate device that interacts with your private keys, in our model, is kind of this ultra isolated computer that has a very limited means of communicating with the outside world. So you keep machine that is designed to interact with a Bitcoin protocol totally separate from another machine that is just intended to interact with your private keys. Does that answer your question?
That does. I just wanted that enumerated for our audience because a lot of times people can be very confused as to which side of things and why that matters. It's basically getting your Bitcoin signed transaction computer completely offsides or completely segregated from the internet connected computer 100%. And whether that means a cold card or whether that means a SeedSigner or whether that means a Trezor. But the problem is with a Trezor or a Ledger, you are USB connecting that thing to your computer. So it's arguable whether or not the thing is completely segregated, which is the problem in general.
And what I would also point out is I don't want to like impugn like Trezor, Ledger, or anybody else that uses this USB connection method, because one, that was a huge leap forward at the time when those devices came out, like a purpose-built device with protections in place such that you can connect it and there's a reasonable amount of security in place to keep, if your computer was infected, to keep your private keys from being accessed or something like that. They were a huge advance forward. And SeedSigner is designed with multi-signature cold storage for generational wealth in mind. I think that for some of these other Bitcoin security models, like they may make a ton of sense for a wallet that you use a lot more frequently, or as a part of a quorum where you have, a multi-sig setup where you're implementing, 3 or 4 or 5 different devices that have all, different hardware profiles, different code bases, different security trade-offs, different, assurances, that sort of thing. So I don't want to seem like I'm coming down on, hardware wallets that are connected via USB or anything like that. This is just a different approach that I started to pursue because I was the solution that Spectre DIY came up to me was a very elegant solution. And what I'll just say a little bit further with that is, like, I'm admittedly a cheapskate, and to build a Spectre DIY at that point was like $120 was probably about where it was at. And as I started to DM a little bit with the security researcher, Michael Flaxman, he had this idea to use the Raspberry Pi Zero version 1.3. I didn't know it existed before he tuned me into it, to use that very specific version of the Raspberry Pi to be able to create the last word of a seed phrase. So if you do you take the BIP39 seed words, these are the words that people are familiar with when they initialize a hardware wallet and that you have to write down. Well, you can, if you print and cut them out, you can, and in fact, most people should do this with a new hardware wallet instead of trusting the entropy that's supplied by the device. But you can cut out all 2048 of these words, put them in a hat, essentially pick out your own seed phrase. But the last word operates as a mathematical checksum against the words that precede it. So Flaxman's idea was to use this Raspberry Pi Zero as a very naturally, like, air-gapped way to calculate the last word of the seed without, ever having your seed exposed to a device that was online or anything like that. So I kind of took that concept and ran with it. I bought the little, screen and controls so that you could interact with the Pi, without needing a keyboard and a monitor and everything. And I created a proof of concept for that. And then in my mind, I'm like, what if I took like a $5 Raspberry Pi camera and attached it to the setup? I could potentially recreate the basic functionality that was in that Spectre DIY that made so much sense to me, and kind of turn it into a full-fledged signing device to where you're not just creating keys, but you can actually, sign full transactions with it. And, this is a year and a half ago. So when SeedSigner was first kind of conceived of, I could walk into, there's a store by my house called Micro Center, which is a national computer kind of chain. Mm-hmm. You could buy a Raspberry Pi Zero version 1.3 for $5. Then you buy this little display hat online for $10 or $15 and a $5 Raspberry Pi camera. You actually build this whole thing very reasonably for between $30 and $40 when the whole thing first started. Supply chain stuff came in and kind of spoiled that for now. But I think I mentioned before, I wanted to get into multi-sig. And to just get started with the most basic multi-sig, if you wanted to do it right, you need to buy at least 3 hardware wallets, right? So you got to spend $200-$300, whatever. But this concept of statelessness appealed to my inner cheapskate, because if in fact the device is not remembering the keys, then you can potentially use it to manage multiple keys within the same multi-sig.
Yeah, so this thing could literally be your entire multi-sig quorum if you wanted it to be.
This is actually there is something beautifully simplistic about this, actually. Like when you think about a device where it's powered off and the seed and private key go away, like what this DIY project. Basically, I'm thinking from an inheritance planning perspective, right? There's something tremendously physical and simple, right? When you're explaining to a spouse, like our Bitcoin is the seed, right? It's the seed, whether that's split into 3, whether that's 1, whatever setup you have, that is our Bitcoin. This is literally just the device, the device it works through to interact with the protocol. There honestly is something that can be sold there to a spouse from an inheritance planning perspective. Let's say this is back to what we were saying at the top of the show, like understanding all that matters is the private key to sign into Bitcoin. Like if you're explaining this to a total noob, that is what matters. And there's almost something about this process where, you can be let's say you're the Bitcoin savvy person in your household. You're the one that builds a device like this, but then the other individuals that need to understand what's actually going on, it's the physical seed that really matters. There is, I don't know if that makes sense, but there is something almost simplistic about this.
It actually kind of improves on an aspect of the security model of a traditional hardware wallet, because people a lot of times don't make the mental connection that the private key that is being stored on your hardware wallet is a copy of usually 2 private keys, at least 2 copies of that same private key. Because when you initialize, a Trezor or what's the first thing they have you do? Write down these 24 words or these 12 words or whatever. So now when you're onboarding with that particular wallet, you have this device that holds a copy of your private key. But the very first thing it has you do is write down another copy of your private key. So now you're kind of stuck in this position where you have 2 copies of your private key. And what do you do with those? If you keep the written copy, because you do need to keep the written copy, because a lot of people have had the experience when they do a firmware upgrade or something, or what if they lose the device or it's damaged? Like you need to have that recovery phrase.
100%.
But do you keep it with the hardware wallet? Like if you have a fire in your home, then like both of your things are destroyed. So what do you do with that written paper? Maybe you put it in a safe deposit box. But now you have kind of this second copy of your seed kind of floating around out there. And a lot of people, because they perceive that the key on their Trezor is being protected by a PIN code, a lot of them won't use a passphrase to protect their seed. So this other seed that they have floating around, and we're just talking about single sig right now.
Yeah.
But this other copy of their seed that they have floating around is really like totally unprotected. So with 2 copies of your seed, you're actually kind of doubling your chances of having your seed disclosed, whether it's somebody gets a hold of your hardware wallet and they're able to either, figure out your PIN or somehow compromise the device, or somehow somebody's snooping in safe deposit boxes or wherever else you're keeping it, they stumble upon your private key.
And
so
remember,
with
this needs
SeedSigner,
to be, I was going to say this isn't next year. This is 11 years from now, or 23 years from now, or 40 years from now. Like people are thinking on a short-term time frame. We're talking about you passing away and your grandkid's friend moping around. I don't know what the fuck, but we're talking a long time horizon here, and this needs to hold up for that length of time. That's inheritance planning.
Yeah, exactly. And this segues right into the point I want to make here, which is, let's assume if you're listening right now, you've understood single sig, and now we're moving on to multi-sig. And multi-sig is a situation where you have multiple hardware wallets or signing devices that need to unlock your Bitcoin, right? So my question to you, Seed, is what is the best way for me to hold these seeds in separate places in order to get myself in a position where I'm not using Unchained, I'm not using Casa, I'm completely self-sovereign in this situation? General guidance on how people should do this.
Yeah, no, definitely some suggestions. Let me rewind just for a second and say, so I was talking about having 2 copies of your key, the backup and then the copy that's stored on your hardware wallet. With SeedSigner, one of the strengths of our model is that it encourages users to just focus on that one copy of their seed that they're going to keep. And a lot of people have discovered they like to use SeedSigner for single sig, but the whole concept for me was built for multi.
Yeah.
So that if you're going to have a multi-sig setup, you just have to focus on keeping track of one single copy of each of your seeds for
Right.
each member of the quorum.
Mhm.
But to get back to your question, best practices in terms of the absolute best practice for multi-sig is to use multiple hardware profiles, multiple wallets or signing devices with multiple code bases, and such that if a vulnerability is discovered in any one of those platforms, it gives your quorum resilience against having that one particular member of the quorum compromised. Because multi-sig, there it's not all positive with multi-sig. I think overall it's a net positive,
Yeah.
but multi-sig does add additional complexity
Yeah. We
to your
talk about
setup,
this a lot on this
Yeah.
show. Yeah.
and it does add some additional like kind of information storage requirements
For sure.
for people, because you're going to have multiple copies of your key, not multiple keys rather, that you're going to have to be tracking, and then
Right.
in any multi-sig, regardless of who you set it up with, you want to track the descriptor as well and keep backups of that. So, but is
Let's be
multi-sig
really clear
worth
about
it?
that. I'm sorry to stop you right there,
No, no.
but this is something that I had a problem with initially, and I think a lot of people misunderstand is when you run a multi-sig setup, you need to save that multi-sig wallet on an SD card or some other format in order to have the directions. Because even if you have 3 of the 5 keys, you still can't find it unless you have the like direction for the Bitcoin blockchain to find it, which is basically the wallet itself.
There's kind of two ways you could recover from, let's say, you have a wallet set up with Sparrow that's on your laptop and your laptop gets stolen or something like that. There's two potential ways that you can recreate that wallet. One way is you have to have every single private key that was in the original quorum,
Yep.
and you need to combine them in exactly the same way that you did when you created the quorum originally. It's not as complicated as it sounds, especially if you use the default kind of configuration settings. But the emphasis on that is you need every single private key,
All of them.
unless
Right.
the second way that you can recreate that coordinator setup if for whatever reason you lose it. The second way is if you have what's called the full wallet descriptor. And what that includes is all of the configuration information for the wallet, and it includes a public version of all of the private keys that make up that particular quorum. Just to be clear about, for people, yeah.
But here's where we're getting into added complexity. And this is like multi-sig is awesome. We've messed with it. We've used it, but it is an added level of complexity. Like, and this is where you need to walk before you run.
Yeah.
And this
you
is
need
why
to appreciate it.
you need to start tinkering. Like if you're a serious Bitcoiner and you listen to this show and you're gung-ho Bitcoin and you're scared of diving into the tech, like just get started. Just get started, start messing with something, even if it's, getting a Ledger or Trezor. I mean, we're more and more, we're saying get a cold card, plug it into your computer with USB. You can use a cold card in a very simple way, right? But whatever device you pick, whatever suggestion you get from your trusted source, just get started on this thing. Start exploring, because you're not going to go to a totally self-sovereign multi-sig setup overnight, nor should you.
Right. And what I would emphasize to people, don't be scared off by multi-sig. We've talked about kind of like the things that make it harder. You of course have to keep track of multiple keys, and you of course have to keep track or should keep track of that descriptor. But what do you get from multi-sig? So what you get from multi-sig is one, fault tolerance, so that if you lose a private key, it's not the end of the deal for you. If you have a single sig wallet and you lose a private key, like
You're
you're
fucked.
screwed.
Yeah.
There's no recovery from that.
Yep.
So one, it gives you fault tolerance, and two, it gives you the ability to geographically distribute the authentication to be able to spend your Bitcoin. So you can keep maybe a key at home, or you keep one in a safe deposit box, or you keep one with a trusted relative, or like, I of course have a bunch of cops who are friends and gun nuts, and they all have a safe at their house. So maybe I keep one of my keys with a good friend in his gun safe, or whatever your personal kind of security situation is. Like, that's extremely powerful to be able to not only lose a key and recover from it, but to be able to spread your keys out, the secrets that secure your Bitcoin, to be able to spread those out to 3, 4, 5 different locations.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think I often say, and this is, I don't mean to scare people and have them take steps overnight. They shouldn't. But if you have a setup where someone can walk into your house and access all of your Bitcoin by force, there's still work to be done in your self-custody setup. Like, eventually, in my opinion, arrival means someone can walk into your home and you are unable to give them your Bitcoin. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where we graduate to with Multi-Sig. One question I have, and we are interacting with a demographic and an audience with a lot of questions about self-custody, and it becomes very practical for us. Like, it's fun to have these mid to high level conversations about custody, but a lot of people are just getting into this, are scared, don't understand what's going on. We all remember what it felt like to move our first meaningful chunk of Bitcoin, right? It's a pucker factor, and we got to put ourselves back in those shoes. We're fond of the Casas and the Unchains of the world. We know the drawbacks. We understand it's not the same as totally off the radar Multi-Sig, in the sense that there is a centralized pinch point to see your balance. But in terms of inheritance planning and simplicity and the benefits of Multi-Sig without some of the trade-offs, it's certainly in the arsenal of options to use. Do you agree? What's your opinion on collaborative custody?
No, I'm a big fan of collaborative custody. It's not for everybody, and some of us are what I've heard termed as like pathologically self-sovereign. But
totally love that phrase. Totally agree. Like, this has got to work, folks. This has got to work. Pathologically self-sovereign. People will start calling us cucks, though, if we start talking about that. But whatever. we're trying to make this fireman proof, right? Like, people need to be able to store this for 30 years, pass it on to their wife. Like, and Multi-Sig is a wonderful thing, but it is complex. And these companies are doing something unique and extremely helpful, in my view.
They provide two extremely valuable services that I think are core to their offering. And one is the hand-holding of the experience. So they're going to walk you through all of the education you need. And when you have those kind of like that pucker moment, like, you're going to have a little bit more confidence because they've taken you through their process and given you presumably, the necessary education about it. And then, of course, the second kind of big value add that like Unchained and Casa do is actually holding one of your keys, so that if you lose in a basic 2 of 3, if you lose one of your 2 keys, it's not the end of the world. You go to them and they have a reserve key and they'll help you do the necessary recovery steps. But no, I am. We need to have solutions for everybody out there, and for a lot of people who have kind of that kind of anxiety you describe about either being unfamiliar with the technology or not familiar with the tools or whatever it is. Like, they're providing an extremely valuable service, and I don't want to take anything away from them. Yeah.
So I just want to steelman that for a second and take the other side of it. Like, if you had to put your tinfoil hat on for a second and say, why is it a terrible idea to go to Unchained or Casa? Why would you say that?
The only thing I can come up with is you'd end up dealing with a rogue employee who somehow tricked you into communicating your private key.
But they still couldn't do anything with it.
Well, if they got one of your keys, you're screwed. You're saying you give up your key to a rogue employee.
Yeah. What if a rogue employee somehow convinces you to like give them both of your seed phrases?
Oh, gotcha.
And maybe they do this, a couple times a year.
I assumed you were going to go a completely different direction and say like the U.S. government goes completely rogue and says Bitcoin's completely illegal. And now we want to know all the balances of all these people that have gone to Casa or Unchained. That to me seems like the more likely.
There's a privacy leak fact.
Yeah.
There's there's no perfect solution, as we would all. I mean, that's not to scare people off. You need to self-custody your Bitcoin, but this is a very individual decision.
For anybody listening to this, I mean, if that ever became a thing, like, yes, that's a possibility. You're like, yeah, but the more likely thing is that like somebody hacks their servers and finds out how much Bitcoin you have because they don't have your private keys, but they have the XPubs to figure out how much money you actually have stored there. That's the more likely way that this would be a problem. I think we would all agree the net positive from these companies is much greater than the potential net negatives, which is like either A, you lose your money because you fucked up Multi-Sig and you're an idiot, much more likely than the US government makes Bitcoin illegal and they rat you out and you're fucked. Less likely, in my opinion. But Seed, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
No, I totally agree. I guess when you pose the question, my mind probably goes to the worst case scenario,
Right.
which for me is like the
losing
funds,
your Bitcoin. Yeah.
It's somebody after doing this for 20 customers, like does a retirement attack and quits Unchained and then like sweeps everybody's wallets. And it's like, oh, that's a bad situation. The government having knowledge of the coins that you own is not ideal. And I think Bitcoin can, over time, I think fungibility is going to be a big deal and privacy is going to be a big deal, but tools just aren't there yet. In terms of, you can use Bitcoin in a significantly more private way. It seems to me like it's a relatively complex.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about
There's
that.
There's still work to be done. Yeah. There's still work to be done. I actually think, Seed, I think this is the next battle in Bitcoin because there's a lot of big players that are going to be clamoring for regulatory clarity, let's say in the financial landscape. And the beauty of Bitcoin is that this thing, without violating consensus rules, man, this thing evolves. And when we think about, even SegWit to Taproot to cross input SigAg, I mean, who knows what the future holds, but like fungibility is going to improve whether people like it or not. I just think there could be big players, especially when policymakers kind of catch wind of what the implications of these upgrades might mean. I think there are going to be some Bitcoiners that actually resist it a little bit. Have you guys ever thought about that or gamed that out in terms of it kind of going mainstream and institutional at this point? I mean, there's a lot of people in this space that aren't sovereignty and privacy minded, man. And I'm not knocking them, but they're thinking of it more as from an economic asset.
I don't think they're going to have a choice. I think that it's just going to probably happen, and they may be along for the ride and they don't even realize it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the people that are going to be developing on it at its core are probably going to be more cypherpunk-esque than the average hedge fund.
God, manager. I hope so.
It kind of goes back to what we learned during the fork wars during 2017. A lot of takes on that, but like basically a certain group tried to co-opt Bitcoin because they felt that more transaction throughput via bigger blocks was the best thing for the network, and it didn't work out. And what you're kind of talking about is kind of the same thing. Like, what if certain high-profile, very invested individuals think that enhanced privacy might inhibit gains with a Z? Yeah. And so,
with a Z.
And my hope is that
Capital Z.
like you said, the cypherpunk ethos stays strong, and that the people who are really doing the difficult protocol work and who are developing these tools, just keep building the stuff that they want. And I think I worry less about that. I worry less.
Number one, I need to figure out a place where I can buy one of these Raspberry Pi Zeros for less than like $100 because it's pretty much not possible right now.
They'll come back online. Yeah, we're both building one of these, Seed. I can guarantee you that.
Let's offline talk about that. I may happen to have like a
secret stash.
Last summer when people were stacking stats,
you were stacking
Raspberry Pi.
You were stacking pies.
You were stacking pies.
I'm starting to run a little bit lower, but I do have a few that, especially for people who are curious, want to build.
Yeah,
one. I love to help people out.
We got some black market pies.
I'm definitely pie curious.
Curious.
Yeah,
I'm going to steal that one, I think.
Yeah. Seed, we could talk to you for another like 2 hours, man. We're gonna. I'm gonna get back to my family in the living room. Also, I'm sitting on this really uncomfortable chair. I feel like I've got a stick up my ass right now. Like my back's tight. If I was in a more comfortable chair,
I've seen you adjusting posture. Like a little bit,
I am like, I don't know what's going on here, but even just for for my own back health and the longevity of my firefighting career, I think we've got to call this here.
You're getting to an age where you'll feel that tomorrow.
Yeah. Seriously, love this talk.
So I am on Twitter, rather, just SeedSigner, 2 words, Seed and Signer put together. On Telegram, I'm the same thing. If you're maybe less technical and you want to learn more about the project, it's just SeedSigner.com, all one word, SeedSigner.com. Or if you go to GitHub and search for SeedSigner, you'll find it right away. If you're more technical and want to kind of learn more about the code and the underpinnings of it. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this opportunity to talk with you guys. I feel like we could do this again sometime.
For sure.
And we need to get one of these in your hands and then maybe have another conversation 6 months from now.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see you in person too at a Freedom Forum or something in the future. We haven't been to that, but that's on our radar for sure. Maybe in the next couple of years. I'm
leading a workshop in Switzerland in August at a it's a German name for this conference, and I'll mess it up if I try to say it, but I'm not going to try to say it. It's in Switzerland in August. Look at my Twitter feed. There'll be something out there. I'm actually planning on being in El Salvador in November for the Adopting Lightning conference. I always get confused if it's Adopting Bitcoin or Adopting Lightning. But the second annual El Salvador Bitcoin conference, I've been announced as a speaker there, and we should be hosting a workshop to get some SeedSigners in some local people's hands.
Are you planning to be in at Bitcoin 2023?
That's the plan. I haven't looked closely at any information.
Well, I mean, we'll for sure see you there.
If we outed him, he'd have to kill us, though, Josh.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
Yeah. Seed, thank you so much, man. Seriously, this was a blast, and I mean, I can't say enough how cool this project is. Like we didn't maybe get enough into the human rights empowerment aspect, but this is really significant. Back to a point I made earlier. It's not that you will, but it's that you can. This is an opportunity to extend sovereignty for people that might be under duress with Bitcoin at some point in the future. And seriously, thank you for what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thanks so much for listening into the show. If you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to like or subscribe on whatever app you're using for podcasts or on YouTube. And if you have an extra minute, go ahead and leave us a review. We are also active on Twitter at blue_collar BTC, and our email address is bluecollarbitcoinpodcast@gmail.com. We invite questions, comments, or inquiries of any kind. We look forward to you joining us again on the BCB Podcast.